I'd like to synthesize and raise certain issues which will have to become open to public. For example, the Balkan Wars are known to be occupational. This stance is different from the stance of the neighboring countries, which were directly involved in their histories, have their continuity of unchangeability. That is, that their wars for them were liberating, and for some of them were defeating, because in them and the peace treaties, their envisaged goals were not realized for maximum expansion of their stained borders. To the Macedonian, they determine and seal its fate. That fate, for some part of the Macedonian people, will last till the Second World War, when the Macedonian anti-fascists will be the only one to fight against, in organized manner, against Nazi fascism, in order to form their own country. The question is whether the Macedonian could influence their fate and create their own country. The efforts Macedonians have done in order to fight for their identity, the activity of Chupovsky, as Pulaski, who will dispose the Macedonian, thought that the Macedonians are people and their place is Macedonia. The Metropolitan Theodosy, Mistirkov, and other known and unknown who have traced the path for Macedonian national identity. But we know that opposed to them, there are many Macedonians who received foreign national feeling, and non-Macedonians who intended to change, distort the Macedonian identity. The Balkan Wars for the Macedonians are catastrophic. There are more reasons for this. The reasons for war, as we know, are the liberation of the brothers Christians who were still under Ottoman rule. That was challenge for all young Balkan bourgeoisie who watched at Macedonia, and for the price of weak Ottoman imperial power to grab foreign, not Bulgarian, not Greek, not Serb territories. The Macedonians stay by the side. They simply didn't find power within their own ethnic structure to build strong position and show that in the Balkans, except for the Balkan Serbs and Greeks, there is another people who expect different solution to the wind wheels. Unfortunately, the Macedonian revolutionary movement was separated and not mature enough. That is why the chance for more solid organization of the Macedonian in political fashion was failed. On the other hand, the terror, the violence, and the constant pressures of the propaganda organized by the Balkan state became every day of the Macedonian people, played key role. But even that was not even motive enough for their organizing against the Balkan state. Some most characteristic quotes of Alexander Tsankov, who about Macedonia, will say: one will be for equal separation of Macedonia. Our Bulgaria pretends for total adoption of Macedonia towards the Bulgaria, and Serbia would like to have also whole Macedonia. The Macedonians in these calculations, nobody asks them, but they do not fiercely impose themselves, even with military, not even with military actions. In this environment, there were small military forces who were not energetic enough to be heard. The Macedonians were not strong enough because they didn't have appropriate organization, representatives, or body to be influential enough to impose themselves. That is why it was not calculated with the Macedonians in none of the Balkan states. Macedonia and the Macedonians were object to be manipulated and separated. The fall of 1912, the Balkan Alliance was formed. The mobilization of the allies and Turkey reflected in Macedonia. The Macedonians again didn't succeed to mobilize their own forces for their own purpose and interest. In the beginning and during the war, they were not directly involved for their own interest as ethnicity, but with certain and strict organization. They didn't appear with strict organization. They did not have serious political organization nor military organization. Hence, the general and only idea is that Macedonia and the Macedonians in the Balkan Wars were not factor neither in the wars nor in the war actions. Instead of personal interest, the Macedonians, in many cases, forced or voluntarily, with great manipulation by other elites, were part of the war formations of other neighboring armies. In Bulgaria, 85,000 Macedonians participated. 100 Macedonians maybe participated in the Bulgarian army. Not only in Macedonian historiography, but many of the military units of VMRO were the service of the Bulgarian kingdom and court. Whether it was in order to help liberate Macedonia or in order to ally with them, it should be answered. However, whatever the motive was to be put on service for Bulgaria, Serbia, or Greece, and for what purpose, history should answer this question, especially the special experts for this period. Macedonians were also part of the Serbian army in the Kozjak region and Skopska Crna Gora region. Voluntarily, army unit was formed in Sveti Nikolae and Gjorgji. They also fought for the interests of Serbia. Bulgarians and Serbs were mobilized Macedonians. They were in the front line. They were sent to be the first to cross the front line. They were the first victims also. Many Macedonians whose families had many children were forced to have their two children fight one against each other, having been separated and treated by two different countries. They were sensitive to manipulation. 1913, they didn't know where they belonged to, where are the borders. Villagers from Tolishta and Palchishta asked the commander of Prilep to tell them where their villages belong to, and the competent authorities were not able to answer their question. They were asked to ask their question in Thessaloniki. There were mass dissertations and revolt by Macedonians. The same situation was of the Macedonians in the Balkan Wars. Reforms in our autonomy for Macedonia. Which direction this took? The idea for autonomous Macedonia existed in the diplomacy of the great forces as alternative, and also within the Balkan countries. But this question was particularly in Bulgaria was interested in this question, and the main message of Macedonia. It is known that the territory of the European part of the Ottoman Empire were supposed to be equally separated among the Balkan allies. Representatives of the Macedonian 1912, there were activities where the autonomy of Macedonia is the only solution with which end would be put among the Balkan rivalry. Resolutions were brought. Representatives of Macedonian Brotherhood in Bulgaria submitted a memorandum to the Bulgarian government and great forces where they presented their demands concerning Macedonia, that that Macedonia shouldn't be separated, and that Macedonia as whole should belong to Bulgaria. Before the Bucharest Treaty, when the separation was the idea for autonomous Macedonia was removed. We ask the question, why Macedonians were not able to create unique core to serve the Macedonian values? Why Macedonians decided to change colors massively? Why Macedonians did not succeed in separating from the army of other countries? The answer is that the attachment of Macedonians to other armies saw their chance to, in this case, what happens with the Macedonians which attach themselves to Serb armies, whether they thought that by attaching themselves to the Serb army would help solve the Macedonian independence. I have why Macedonians decided to enter government if they didn't organize themselves in opposition to the government, when they saw that there was no use in that. As an ethno-geographic whole, Macedonia is just the place where greatest war actions take place. We can interpret this that the Macedonians contributed in the getting free of the Ottoman rule in Macedonia. Then what is the interest in the contribution of Macedonians in chasing away the Ottoman rule when they exchange it with another rule, the foreign rule? They signed the Bucharest Treaty. Pomoro did not react at the separation by accident or on purpose. We will learn in future. The main threat that decided the Macedonian future is the question whether we have learned something from all this history. Macedonia, until 1941, was object of all peace treaties, and then things will change. In 1944, Macedonians will become equal subject in the international community. Today, Republic of Macedonia and the Macedonians are reality. Macedonia and Macedonians are not a virtual picture which somebody wants to expire. Thank you, Professor, for your paper. The title of the paper, which consists of many questions open to the whole public. This paper, it was my task to read this paper, written based on different sources, history sources, and with personal point of view of Macedonia and Macedonians in the Balkan Wars and in continuity until the creation of the independent country. I'm sure that this will inspire a discussion. Just as an addition, I would say that an eminent Carnegie committee in 1914 noted these divisions among Macedonians and noticed Macedonians as a separate nation. And in the report they wrote that Macedonians, in terms of their participation in the war and what they can cause as a factor or non-factor in the war, where they were moved away from their homes so that they would not be witnesses of the separation, and they were sent as the greatest military unit, as the voluntary unit to participate in war actions in Thracia. As part of the organization were the factor that the Bulgarian government always looked with low confidence the source. The committee could only bring atrocities or conflicts. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, you may take them. I am Jovanka Kepeska, a university professor. I'd like to ask the author of the paper whether the participation in the armies in the Balkan Wars is predominantly under pressure, forced, because it was recruitment at that time, or it is conscious determination for certain Bulgarian cause or Serbian. My family, my family experience, we do not have such data, such information. It is only forced recruitment, army recruitment. Second question. We know that Krste Petkov-Misirkov speaks of spiritual revolution or cultural revolution and points out two segments of what should happen as spiritual revolution. But let's say in circumstances where schools are Bulgarian, when Serbian priests have walk sticks and they're beaten in order to provide church service, in circumstances where churches have their own influence, education has also its influence. Of course, that national consciousness is in part of culture, and the most representative and most severe and most successful absolutely consciousness is formed by the political factor. Here we have moments where we can talk about 1908, the party of Vasil Glavinov, their movement in the history of the workers' movement is mentioned as one of the most progressive parties in terms of national self-determination. But allow me to say something. I appreciate what you say. So my question is, so whether it was under fierce pressure, the army recruitment of Macedonians into foreign neighboring armies, and another one, whether it is opposition that is a reflection of Macedonians' opposition against Ottoman rule, and finally who and in what way forms national consciousness and all cultural consciousness. And it is not a straight way. Thank you. Thank you for your question. In science, science is based on facts. Facts are bare if you do not analyze them, and if you do not analyze the time where they come from. So the real picture, your first question, whether consciously or unconsciously, of course, there were people who joined the army consciously. A great part of the population joined the army under forced pressure or not, and not. The Bulgarian army made a great offensive on the Macedonian soil. They succeeded in occupying great mass. So a certain group of Macedonians who were in Serb uniforms. And they were asked, where are you from? And they say, I'm from Ralfdol, and it is in Veles. It is a real village. And the other one answers, you're Bulgarian. Well, what can I do? He takes out his Serb uniform and puts on Bulgarian uniform. So the story I tell you, that same soldier, and then the Bulgarians take him to another part, to Ferdinand Cheshma, and that same soldier who took off Serb uniform and put on Bulgarian uniform went in the chamber and died in the war actions. Great part of the people left with certain convictions. Many Macedonians, in my paper I write, felt that, asked themselves, so what are we doing here? Why are we here? We are aware that when Macedonia was destroyed, when Yugoslavia was destroyed, when they asked him, who do you shoot against? When they asked a Slovenian soldier, when Yugoslavia was deteriorating, who do you shoot against? Why do you shoot? He said, I don't know. I just want to go home. Just the army came and the Macedonians took all the burden, food. The Bulgarian and Serbian armies did not bring food. They ate from the Macedonian villages.
So that is the actual issue when it comes to conscious or unconscious, or being aware or not being aware. I mentioned that circumstances have to be taken into consideration. We are all clear that national awareness is usually linked to the state. The state is a very forceful instrument, and they don't have anything. So whoever comes will stick to the...
Very well your history, of course. I discovered your history in the last 6 or 8 months. And I tried to find if Macedonian question was on the table of London Conference or in Bucharest. It was difficult for me to find something. Of course, tomorrow in my paper I will present you the action of Romanian government to put this idea, this project of Macedonia on the conference in Bucharest, but not is now the moment. Tomorrow I will present this. My question, please tell me, in 1912, 1913, the time of the Balkan War, the Macedonians were prepared to be or to do a new state on the map of Balkans. Why I put this question? Do you have in that time an intellectual who could ask on the London Conference or to the Greek power, we want to have our own country? Because I know a lot of people was in the Serbian army, Bulgarian or Greece army, but as intellectual, because the politician, I didn't find politician from Macedonia on the conference in London. I didn't find in conference of Bucharest somebody from Macedonia. Who could represent your people at this conference? This is my question. Thank you.
Previously, I said that the Macedonians didn't find the power, the strength to have an intellectual stepping out and talking about these issues and to oppose the EU policies. So that was the weakness that we had, the shortcoming in the Macedonian ethnical tissue that failed. The chief reason was the disintegration and the powerful propaganda of the Balkan young bourgeois countries. The propaganda was so strong that the Macedonian people couldn't do much. The intellectual Macedonian thought exists. And in the first part of my presentation, I was mentioning Chupovsky, Pulevsky, the group of intellectuals in Russia. So those are the ones that have this power, intellect, and talent, but they were powerless to unite and do something more. The Bulgarians had a propaganda, the Greeks had a propaganda, the Serbs had a propaganda. So the concrete answer maybe to your question would be that the Macedonians weren't ready politically to do more. If they did have the capacity to do so, they would have. So in the end, the statement would be that following 1920, after establishing the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenians, and then the Macedonian thought, the intellectual thought, is not lost anywhere within the Yugoslavian Federation. So it's just waiting patiently somewhere in the background for an option, a momentum to emerge and to show itself in full light. So 30th and the 40th years, those were the years in the past century of the explosion of the Macedonian intellectual thought, because they addressed the global arena, went to the north, went to the south, went to the east, went to the west. Nothing was done. They were talking, they were sending letters, they were doing everything that they could. But at that time, again, each attempt was also conveyed to the federal authorities being under Yugoslavia as well. So we have to be brief, in the interest of time.